So, in preparation for today's video, I was reflecting on the future of comedy and what direction I think it's going to go in as we become more interconnected on a spirit level. And I see the forms of comedy that are dying as those that are related to the body and clustering. If, in terms of the body, it's basically getting to the point where we are accepting of the fact that we go to the bathroom and we have genitals, and some people are thin and some people are overweight, and we have different colored hair, we have different colored skin, and there's all this, and the skin color kind of ties in with clustering. That racial humor is one way of people traditionally getting a laugh, talking about this is the way this group of people does things, and clustering about professions such as lawyers. And these kinds of jokes, they basically, those that cluster people together, are limiting the individual experience. And that's a dying process, because the last thing that we want to do on a soul level is to be limited because of some role or some genetic trait or bodily form aspect of who we are. And I think a lot of times why people are drawn towards making generalizations about other people is that it might seem to make life easier, in the sense that in your genetic roots, if you know that all animals that look like a lion or a tiger could potentially kill you, then it is good to get away from them and stay away from them so they will not hurt you. And other generalizations about the weather and food and other things like that can contribute to your own survival. So making quick, generalized judgments about your reality at a certain point in time could make survival easier. And in this very complicated world, the ego would love for you to say that your race is superior than other races, or that your weight makes you a good person, or that your hair color makes you a good person, etc., etc., etc. And I think that's all dying out, as we recognize our interconnectedness and we recognize our diversity. Humor is going to be less about these kinds of things that we're growing out of. And as we get used to the fact that we have bodily functions and so forth, and that we understand ourselves as a sexual being and a being that digests food, then those topics will be less giggly in our mind, because it's like, okay, yeah, that's part of who I am. So what does that leave? What I think is most amusing is a combination of both absurdity and ego, making fun of ego. Now, absurdity is about unexpected connections. The things that you don't normally put together or expect seem absurd. And why does that seem funny? Well, let me reflect on that a moment. I think it's because we don't want life to be overly predictable, and that stimulation can produce a feeling of relief, which can lead to laughter, a release that comes through laughter. And so if your expectations are thwarted and something absurd, unexpected comes up, that is a form of humor that doesn't necessarily degrade other people. Another form that I mentioned is about making fun of ego. And I feel that that has a great deal of potential, because part of what keeps people resistant to leading a more spiritually focused life is the feeling that it has to be too serious and dry and rigid and dull. And it doesn't. You know, you can still find humor. You can just laugh at yourself. I laugh at myself much more now than before I started on the spiritual path. Sometimes I'll just observe a thought process or something that's coming up from my ego, and I'll just laugh at myself or make a little joke to myself about the ego process. So I feel that humor can walk hand in hand with spirituality as we move towards a more enlightened, peaceful way of being. It's about being willing to laugh at the fact that even if we do have a spiritual essence, we still, for the most part, 99.999% of us, etc., have ego. And we need to be able to accept that within ourselves. And when we hear comedians that can point out ego, trends in society and habits within individuals, and we laugh, then we can become more conscious, and we can decide whether or not we want to perpetuate those ego habits within ourselves. Because if we don't know what they are, if we're not aware of how our ego operates, then it's very hard to stop being egotistical. It requires light to be shown upon the ego so that we can understand it better, and so we can laugh it away instead of, diminish it through suffering that it brings. So those are my thoughts on comedy, humor, and where it's headed.